God's presence, the essence of Jesus into those spaces in your life. Where can the Holy Spirit fill the void in you rather than the things outside of you in this world? You are each here for a purpose, for a divine reason. My heart sends you gratitude for showing up today. So let's take a deep breath together like we did in the beginning, really collectively coming back into the presence, back into the room together, starting with an inhale and exhale out. Taking as much time as you need to really allow yourself to remain in your heart, but come into the presence. You can flutter your eyes open in your own time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. The alchemy of suffering. To some people that word's played out, but to me it's still cooking stuff up, you know? That it is about this sense of transformation. Taking something that seemingly doesn't have any value and creating something of immense value with it, you know? Taking raw metal materials and making gold out of them. Taking pain and hardship and loss and grief and creating a sense of wholeness and a sense of belonging in your own being, you know? So often we're trying to escape the reality of what is, you know, with all of our preferences and aversions. But the alchemy of suffering, I was thinking about it because something that has stuck with me over these years is this. We've talked about it briefly before, but in Romans 5, Paul has this nugget of wisdom that begins with suffering. And for some of you here, you're like, who is Paul? Has he came yet? And have I met him? We're not talking about that. If that's where you're at, you're in such a better seat, I'll admit. It's you'll have a little less to work through, and by a little I mean a lot. Paul's great in his own right and in his own way. Let's just talk about him for a second, shall we? Paul, he wrote much of what we know as the New Testament. We have compiled letters of him to other churches in different areas and regions that were giving instruction and theological ideas and ways of governing local communities of people. Today, these would be called emails. So we get to look in a dude's email and read what he was writing to people who were hopefully trying their best to facilitate some kind of space with this new emerging spirituality from this rabbi that came up and we decided like Institution and Empire always does, decides to kill the guy because he's got a much different message than what keeps everybody else in line. And so because of that, Paul, has this experience, and I just want to speak to him a little bit because, again, some of you may not know who I'm talking about. For those of you, you're like, I don't want to talk about Romans, dude. I get it. But again, he's this person who had this incredible mystical experience with not the person, the historical Jesus, but this essence of the living Christ who identified himself whenever he was on his way to this town called Damascus. This would be like, I'm heading up to Sacramento. You know what I mean? It's just the place that they're going to. And he gets knocked off his horse, and he gets blinded by this light. Blinded by the light. Intrusive thoughts. Stay focused. And he gets blinded by this light, and he hears this voice that says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Nobody else hears this voice, by the way, so we could call this a psychedelic experience, as a matter of fact. He has this mind-manifesting experience that's only happening seemingly inside of him, that has a physical effect to it, that he then has to go, he can't see, he's blinded. And then after that moment, that experience in time, he is spending the next 3 years of his life, 6 years of his life, trying to unpack his real life experience that happened to him. From the place that he was at, his understanding of what reality was, his understanding of what religion was, who God was, who he was in light of that, and his zealous role and duty. He's trying to figure out how to make sense of all of this based on a real life experience that happened to him in a very surprising way. And I think for many of us, if we're honest, a lot of us, that's happened to us in some way, shape, or form. Maybe an experience has happened, a circumstance. It could be a series of years, a season of time, or a blip in a moment, but we're trying to unpack and sort through life with the best we have with what we got at the time. And so here's a guy who's trying to make sense of it all, and he's trying to place it in his boxes. And what I want to just say is about Paul, just to give some context to him as we read some of his words and writings, is Paul is a man that is trying to figure all of this out just like us. And over church history, over 2,000 years of time, we've come to this idea of, the nerds will nod in agreement, of sola scriptura, where all scripture is exactly at the same height of authority. Well, that's not quite accurate. Paul's words should always be interpreted through the words and lens of Jesus. After all, we associate with this Christian, right? So we understand that through the lens of that. I'll digress. That'd probably be a good podcast deep dive. But just to give you an idea, he's trying to figure this out. And in Romans, this is kind of his like big systematic theology where he really paints out kind of this whole idea, this big grandiose idea of how all of it's supposed to fit together and work together, and how people who aren't Jewish are now included and all of this stuff. And we're not going to talk about any of that. Admittedly, we will be cherry picking this very nugget of wisdom, plucking it out of this big systematic theology, and talking about some of the real life implications that happens through this system of this path, this unfoldment, that I think is a really beautiful thing. Because Paul said some really beautiful, incredible things that we've kind of thrown out. And he also said some really kind of dumb things that a lot of people still try to, align with. And it's your discernment to learn how to read these emails that you're getting a scope and lens in on, that have been, passed down to us from all of these ages. So, little background on that person of Paul. Because this nugget of wisdom that he shares has stayed with me throughout the years. I remember in my senior year of high school, I had to, I didn't have to, but if I didn't want to be a fifth year senior, who wants to do that? I had to transfer schools because I know it might be surprising, but I was not intellectual or academic at all in high school. I didn't care about it. I wanted to play death metal, and I wanted to smoke outside the back of the church, and I wanted to, do other things. We'll just leave it at that. I didn't have much interest in a grade point average or anything. I loved picking up on certain history pieces, but didn't really have much interest. If you want me to help with math, think again, ask somebody else. It took me to my senior year of doing night school to get through Algebra 1. Ha! True story. You don't want me helping with much of that. My friends were in like calculus. I'm like, I don't even know what you guys are doing in there. What are you even doing? Geometry, shapes? I don't know. Now I'm like, sacred geometry is rad, like your arm. At any rate, I didn't care about school. I was more interested in zoning out and sleeping as much as possible. So therefore, I went to summer school every year, ended up finally, senior year, this Christian school that met in the basement of our church. You could get a state-recognized degree. You could get a high school, diploma, but it was a couple less credits, but it still made the cut. So I was like, sweet. If I transfer to that school, and do night school too, I won't have to be a fifth-year senior. So transferred to this school, went from a class of 800 to a class of 16, and had to deal with all of that. I didn't know about weird private school vibes like that, Christian school, and I'm like, gosh, this is not the vibe. But we're here and we're doing it, and I graduated, luckily, by the skin of my teeth. It's not why you came to hear about my high school education. But in that school, for the first time, I had to take a Bible class. And I'm a pastor's kid, but my dad we didn't really have a lot of deep theological conversations around the house. And in this Bible class, we started to look at Paul's writings, and we started to look at Romans. And that was the first time I really took a deep dive into that. And it was interesting to me, actually. And I really pressed into that and really started meeting with the Bible teacher and felt very compelled by a lot of this teaching. And we got to that point. The ring, somebody's at your house. Okay. Hope it's the Amazon guy. We've been waiting for him. And so I came across this thing in Romans 5, and it says, suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And some old versions say a hope that does not disappoint. And some of the newer versions say a hope that does not put us to shame. And I'll take both of those. I'll take not being disappointed and not putting me to shame all together, please. Thank you. I'll have all of that. Just give me scoops of not putting to shame and plenty of not disappointment. And I remember, while that was kind of an interesting point of time, there was a moment in time then which wasn't uncommon throughout the teenage years, of this bout of depression that hit after graduation and things, and started working and whatnot. And I remember one morning just waking up and just like, God, I just don't want to do this. And, it's so funny to look back. It's like, what part of 19-year-old you is suffering? But you are experiencing that, right? You're always experiencing life in the timeline that it's unfolding in front of you. This is all you know. This is all you know. You don't know what's around the next bend. This is all you got. And I remember that verse hit me like suffering produces perseverance. And we'll save this for next time about perseverance and that will that comes up. But just accepting the suffering that was being experienced right then in that moment. For the first time, not trying to push it away, not think that something weird was happening to me that shouldn't be happening to me. But this sense of pain and disappointment and all of these feelings, for the first time, it was like, all right, I accept that. But in our world, we don't like to accept suffering too much. Even I'm surprised. I'm proud of people for showing up. The Alchemy of Suffering in the title. You're like, I want to go somewhere and have somebody tell me about suffering. No, man, I need some excitement, And you'll get there. Hope is coming. But the doorway to it is right through that path of the downright hardship, pain of life. And so suffering, we tend to think of suffering in terms of pain. And hardship and anguish. And it certainly includes all of that, absolutely. We tend to think of suffering in the West only as like maybe, people that don't have enough resources in some areas of the world, or people experiencing war-torn countries. And that is suffering, yes. But it's suffering in a way more so of pain, or there's other elements external that if those external things would be different, we want those external things to change. But suffering is actually something that happens inside of you. Suffering is something that has the ability to transform and to bring you into a state of even, dare I say, bliss, even in the midst of the struggle and the hardship and the toil and the pain. In the book Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, right, he writes about him going through this Holocaust experience, but yet finding this meaning and this hope that pulls him through that. It's arguably, at the modern time, that's one of the most crazy things that has ever happened and is allowed to happen in the modern world. But he finds this reason for being that transcends his external circumstances and realities that is in fact causing pain and difficulty and hardship. Suffering is something that can be transformed from within. And so when Paul talks about this unfoldment of suffering, and we'll talk about each of these movements, but I just wanted to start first with the reality of suffering, because maybe some of us have been experiencing some inner turmoil, some frustration, some anger in this season. And we feel bound up inside with all of this. There is a way to find liberation from that. There is a possibility for that. And the paradox of the possibility of liberation first comes with accepting those thoughts, those feelings, that reality, the circumstance as it is. And that's a difficult, paradoxical, non-Western mindset idea to do. We just think, just turn the good music up louder, man. Say the positive mantras stronger. Do all of these things, and then life will somehow get better around the next bend. Just keep going around the next bend. And it's true, keep going around the next bend. But until you accept what's in your path right now, you'll consistently find yourself unsatisfied. Because that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about suffering. We're going to talk about this notion of dukkha for a moment here. Where'd you get the word dukkha? Well, it sounds like dookie, and it's a good way to remember it, and it's a good reason to remember it, because it means that sometimes life is hard as shit. You know what I'm saying? You feel me? You picking up what I'm laying down? Sometimes life is hard, dukkha is. And the Buddha, I'm at a church and he's talking about Buddha. Where am I at? The Buddha, which means awakened one, the awakened one, that's all this means. The Buddha is the awakened one who came to bring reform to a very stale, stuck in ritual, rites and tradition, version of Hinduism. Hinduism in itself isn't just a religion that we associate with. There's lots of different branches and streams. Westerners understand it as religion. We tried to tell them about religion in the East, and they're like, we don't still get it, whatever. I don't know how, all your categories and boxes, but okay. So whatever form that Gautama Siddhartha Gautama, which was this man's name, who was a prince, who had everything handed to him, who was not even allowed to see pain and suffering. They would take him around the streets where there were beggars and where there were people who were missing limbs, and from around all of the lepers and around all of the painful sights to see in humanity, until he finally caught a glimpse of it and he realized the pain and the reality of life. And that sent him on this quest to go find the truth of reality, not this fabricated version that he got in the temple as a prince, in the kingdom that he was brought up in as a king's son. And through this experience, he became the awakened one, the enlightened one, the one who could now see clearly. And then he developed this system of thought from titled as the Four Noble Truths that leads to the Eightfold Path. I'll have you know this, that Buddhism does not have any sense of like divinity or a God structure within it. This is much more of like ways that you associate your mind that open you up in a way to possibility, rather than having you believe set rules and dogmas and doctrines. So it's something that opens you up in a different way. And just as Jesus, by the way, his last name wasn't Christ, Hope you know that by now. But Christ means anointed. Jesus, the anointed one. In the same way, Siddhartha, the awakened one. People who saw through the illusion and the delusion of reality to see that there's a deeper presence at hand that's much more fulfilling than all of the places you keep trying to find fulfillment in this world. Jesus says, my kingdom's not of this world. Buddha says, life is suffering, and if you keep searching for fulfillment here, you will never, ever find it. And many of you sitting here have come to that conclusion. We thought the paycheck was going to solve the problem, and it didn't, because now everything's double the price. We thought working with a new team would help the situation, but everybody's kind of sometimes an idiot everywhere you go. You know what I mean? I thought the new religion would help me find awakening and enlightenment, and then I just found more hierarchy BS at the spiritual circle in Encinitas that I found in my rigid religion place of evangelicalism. The who's who and who knows more words and terms and whatever. It's like, can we just get real? Can we just get real for a minute and experience life as it is? We keep propping up thinking that how we look, what we believe, how we articulate our associations, all of these external worldly hierarchies define fulfillment. Every pure good and teacher will tell you it's something that is not found in the systems, orders, and structures and institutions that we think are going to bring the liberation. Liberation always happens from within. And that liberation comes first from acknowledging this life is suffering. Now, that sounds a little bleak, I'll admit, to admit that life is suffering, because what about my marriage? What about my kids? What about that beautiful time sitting at the beach with the sunset in the middle of summer with a nice Modelo and a fresh lime? That's not spiritual. What about those times? What about those moments? They're incredible. They're great. It's the yin and yang of life. It's the positive and negative. Bye, Marnie. She said, I'm out of here. He's talking about suffering. I'm going to a church that's going to give me a little life. You should have waited. We're almost there. Oh, my goodness. If all else fails, I think I'm just going to go try to do stand-up comedy somewhere and riff. I'm not kidding. I tell Lindsay this. I'm like, I could just, talk about random things and then hopefully, I don't know. Oh, man. But the Lord's got me as a pastor, and I believe that. So, this sense of not being satisfied, seeking for all of it in this world. And this word dukkha, it literally means bad wheel. Bad wheel. It's like when you go, Trader Joe's doesn't have this problem as much. I'll show you my bias. But Winco certainly does. You grab the cart at Winco and you start, it's like, and you're just like annoyed and you're kind of really pushing it hard and it won't turn right. And, you can't get around the person that's like in the electric wheelchair thing going, that's like kind of out of battery. And you're like, dude, that's dukkha. That's quite literally what the Buddha was talking about. The bad wheel at the Winco grocery cart. Life functions like that. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready for some flow. You know what I mean? I want things to roll, be in tune, in flow, in movement, so I can navigate the grocery store of life in a way that is satisfactory and not unsatisfying like that dumb wheel on the grocery cart. Bad wheel, dukkha, is what this means. In the Western mind, when you translate it, it's more like it means quite literally unsatisfactory. Because what's being tapped on here, I'm like looking directly, what's being tapped on here? I love you, Gabby. You're great. She has to get the brunt of all of this every time. And she still sits in the front. I freaking love this stuff. Unsatisfactory. We'll have that conversation later, I suppose. Unsatisfactory is where you have to begin. Because the truth is, we're all seeking some sense of satisfaction. That's an honest thing. That's a human thing. We want to be satisfied, man. You know that feeling of satisfaction on a great day, after a great meal with great people, satisfaction. We want to be satisfied. But the truth is, the second noble truth, which we'll get to in alignment with next week, is that the problem is we are clinging to external things for that satisfaction. Therefore, it's causing more things that don't satisfy us over and over and over and over. And so the thing is, when things that are difficult and painful and hard, that I'll agree with you, I wish those things don't happen in our lives. But to imagine that they won't is living in its own form of delusion in itself. Acceptance of these things. That something weird isn't happening to me when things aren't going smooth. You know? Because that's the problem. Our attachment is to this very easy, go with the flow, everything's great, sunny day kind of vibe. And then it rains, and now you're like, oh God, it's raining, you know? The problem is not the rain. The problem is you that looks outside and says, dang, it's raining. And I love this quote, and we'll end with this. It probably is a good place to land the plane, I think. Is that in the midst of all of the stuff that happens in life, all of the things that make us angry and upset, and even the things that are good. I was talking to Lindsay about this the other day. It's easy to look at the things and be like, I shouldn't identify the bad things that happen. It's a much more skill to develop to say, and I also don't identify and cling to the good ones either. Because if I cling to the good one, something else bad's going to come. And this isn't, again, a pessimistic, bleak view of the world. It's a place of the middle way, this middle path that seeks to not grab and hold on, but seeks to be open to all that God is doing through us, because this life is about refinement. And I hope that you begin to learn through your journey, through your path, through where God's calling you, is that this life isn't necessarily about causing you comfort, but it is able to satisfy. But choosing the comfort will always keep us in this place of picking the things and wondering why things are taking that away from us. And anybody who ends up finding some degree of comfort, whatever arbitrary, fabricated narrative that we think where comfort somehow lives, anybody you ask about that, they're like, yeah, I was here and I didn't find it, whatever, like the Jim Carrey or whatever. It's like, yeah, I don't, whatever, see through it all, But that sense of acknowledging nothing weird is happening to me. God isn't necessarily punishing me right now with whatever this is. And this is a really hard one to understand, because really, from our perspective, really bad things do happen in this life, for sure. But it's alchemizing it to say there is some sort of transformation available here. There is some doorway to wholeness here. And I might not even understand in this body, in this life, the reason for why this is taking place. It might be once my soul takes off the clothes that I call Luke, and then someday I have some awareness, or maybe I don't. I don't know. You're asking a living person, not a dead one. You know what I mean? That's my hope, at least. But that through all of the pain and suffering of life, there is this sense of growth, of refinement, of being shaped, and I accept these things. And what I hope is not necessarily to change, because suffering comes when you're trying to change the world. Everybody wants, it's virtuous. I'm going to change the world, The world will never change if we don't choose to change ourselves from the inside. You know that, right? Like you are a part of this world. We think our ego separate self is this person that's engaging with this outside world. You're a part of it. You're in it. You're all of it. And until that transformation begins to take place from within, we will consistently wear ourselves out trying to strong-arm other things to fit what we prefer or what we are adverse to. And I love this quote. I'm going to just end with this. There's this incredible quote from Alchemy. I'm doing my best at that language. I don't necessarily speak Pali or anything, but she's a Buddhist nun. And if I could summarize my ramblings with you today, that I hope are somewhere helpful. I did think about it beforehand. I'm not just riffing, I promise. I think about this stuff. Dude, This is all I think about, by the way. Quite literally. Either concepts or current, or both in the same. I'm completely absorbed with all of this, just so you know. But I read this quote, and if I could summarize what I'm hoping to communicate today through the acceptance of suffering as the doorway to transformation, it's this quote. Cessation of suffering is not due to the fact that suffering stops. It is due to the fact that the one who suffers ceases to exist. It's pretty dense, so I'm going to lay it down one more time. Cessation, the end of suffering, is not due to the fact that suffering itself stops and ends around us. It's due to the fact that the one who suffers within, that being within, that voice within, that person inside of you, that person scrambling, frantic, irritated, clinging, attaching, averting, all of these things, that person begins to cease to exist. This false self with all of its clinging begins to not be the driver of the ship anymore. And in that place, you'll see that God has been there the whole time. And when you wake up to that and you begin to operate like that, you begin to align your life to that truth, it's not suffering, it's all grace. It's filled with grace as you move through this life. And that's the way, and I'll just end, it takes intention from that place. But you got to get there first. You got to walk through that door first. And then there's a little bit of will, not to be confused with desire. We'll talk about that. But there's some will, and there's some practices, and there's some ways, and there's some all this stuff. But first getting to that place of finding satisfaction within for the person who desires the suffering out there to exist, that person dissolves. It's a long path. It's a difficult path. It's a narrow path, and few will find it, Master Yeshua says. But something tells me that you're here because you're finding it. There's a change that's happening within you. There's a newness that's happening. You're finally coming to the end of looking for satisfaction, validation, the need for affirmation anywhere else, and you're seeking it inside of you where God has been smiling, waiting for you the whole time. So, let's pray. If you don't mind, join me in standing. Let's pray and just ask for a moment for the presence of God to come into our awareness, into our midst, into our being. So if you feel comfortable, you can hold your hands out like you're receiving a gift. You don't have to, though. But I like opening my hands because it says I'm open. I'm not grabbing. I'm not clinging. I'm not holding on to any illusion to bring a false sense of security about my being. I'm open. And the eternal, infinite presence of God that is here, that sustains us, that by every breath that we breathe is keeping us aware of life. That we invite that presence of goodness, of benevolence, of peace, of rest, of relaxation into the deepest part of our being. And even now, as a, countercultural thing, we just wait in silence for a moment. That it isn't always about the next thing, but we just open ourselves up in silence and say, God, I ask for your satisfaction to come alive in my heart. We just ask for the evidence of that presence as peace right now. The tension from the shoulders drop. Jaw tension Some of you have been experiencing jaw tension from this season of life. We just ask right now that the peace would come and release that right now. Thank you, living God, for your presence here, for your awareness. We ask that our mind would come to be one with yours as we raise it above, as we leave from this place, as we operate differently because of the truth of who you are in us. So even now I just ask, God, may you bless us, may you keep us, may your face shine upon us, give us grace and peace as you make us a light in this world for love. So be it. Amen. So good. If any of you did have need prayer for anything, I still believe in that. Like there's an energetic exchange that can happen to bring breakthrough into your life. If you need that, find myself or one of the Lindsays, my wife, or we'll be happy to pray with you, and because this is just coming to me, okay? So sometimes you need people to agree with that with you for tension to be released from us, okay? But then, of course, as always, grab a sticker or something and talk to somebody. You came here for a reason, and find somebody that you've not seen before, say hello to them, and it really is something that is super fun that is happening here. It's incredible, and it even gets better whenever you find some friends in all of this. So have a wonderful Sunday, friends, and we'll see you here in 2 weeks, right? March 2nd, we'll be back here meeting again. Keep an eye on the Instagram for some events. We got some stuff rolling out, a calendar that's coming out. Super official calendar, I know, church calendar, bulletin board. Yeah, right. All right, friends, have a wonderful Sunday. Find somebody and say hello.